Over the past 150 years, 10 manuscripts have surfaced across 5 continents. None should exist. One was a copper codex retrieved from a storm-exposed temple beneath the Indian Ocean. Another, a faded undertext hidden in a Vatican manuscript, scratched into the parchment centuries before the visible ink. A third emerged from 2 kilometers beneath Antarctic ice. A strip of etched metal, older than the ice that held it. Each one maps the stars. Each one tracks a flood. Each one describes coastlines as they looked 12,000 years ago, before recorded history began. And every time, the same sequence follows. The site is sealed, the records vanish, the researcher disappears. The dates don't match our history. The same symbol appears every time. If these pages are authentic, they point to a civilization wiped from the timeline, deliberately. And someone has known longer than they admit. One erased civilization, 10 surviving pages. This is an unauthorized reading of a classified dossier, cataloged internally as anomalous textual artifacts. Comparative Incidents 1871-2023. Official archaeology holds a clear line. Complex urban civilization arose no earlier than 4000 BCE. Before that, isolated villages, stone tools, scattered burial rites. Nothing with roads, nothing with writing, nothing that could map the stars. But over the last century and a half, fragments have surfaced. Not myths, not folklore. Physical manuscripts, carbon-dated in labs, authenticated under sealed conditions, describe organized coastal societies operating near the end of the last ice age. They reference precessional astronomy. They chart advanced cartography. They measure celestial mechanics and abrupt climate shifts. None of these texts appear in open academic literature. Most were never published. They exist as footnotes in internal reports, unlisted entries in museum backrooms, or photographs leaked after the originals vanished. They are not debated. They are denied. Yet the pattern is clear. Across 10 manuscripts, etched metal, carved glass, knotted fiber, erased vellum, 3 constants repeat. Identical star positions, reconstructed to 10800 BCE. A singular flood event tied to abrupt sea level rise, and one emblem. 3 concentric circles, crossed by a vertical line. They are written in unrelated languages. They span continents and centuries. But each time, the same 4-stage sequence unfolds. Discovery, verification, suppression, disappearance. This is not a story about misinterpreted symbols or fringe archaeology. This is about recurring data sealed across locked archives, about scientists quietly reassigned, about pages too dangerous to exist. And only now, within the last 15 years, have field notes, private scans, and orphaned inventory records begun leaking into the public sphere. Not from whistleblowers, from silence, from servers abandoned, accounts forgotten, documents misfiled by time. Piece by piece, the picture emerges. These are not isolated anomalies. These are surviving entries from a deliberately erased chapter. 1 civilization, 10 documents, an entire timeline quietly overwritten. And the first manuscript was already classified before anyone admitted it existed. The Drowned Copper Codex. In December 1998, after weeks of monsoon turbulence, the sea withdrew strangely along the Tamil Nadu coast. Just offshore from Mahabalipuram, a submerged temple platform, long rumored in local legend, briefly broke the surface. A team from the Indian National Institute of Oceanography was already stationed nearby, studying regional erosion. They acted fast. Under the direction of Dr. Rajiv Kalyan, a respected coastal archaeologist, a dive team descended into the exposed ruin. Time was tight. Tide projections gave them barely 4 hours. Inside the collapsed sanctum, half buried in silt and coral, they recovered a fused bundle of copper sheets bound by mineralized twine. The plates were brittle but intact. No one had seen them before. Back in Chennai, the plates underwent careful desalination and cleaning. As layers of corrosion flaked away, deep inscriptions surfaced, rows of glyphs unlinked to any known Tamil Brahmi tradition. A cartographic engraving emerged next, an unfamiliar coastline. It wasn't the ancient Indian shore. It was a modern sonar match. The shelf contours mirrored those documented in 1996 deep scan surveys, features unknown before satellite-guided bathymetry. And along that underwater coast were dots, settlements. The map showed cities under the sea. One plate bore a numerical grid paired with small etched circles, 8 of them. An astronomy consultant at the university ran a match. The cluster resembled the sky as seen from the southern hemisphere around 10,800 BCE, with a slight axial offset. Another pattern repeated across the plates, a symbol etched faintly into the lower margins. 3 concentric circles, crossed vertically. The dates predate their own temple. Within months, the copper bundle was moved to the Government Central Archive in New Delhi for conservation. Dr. Kalyan received a directive. Further study now required clearance under the 1972 Cultural Heritage Protection Act. The original cleaning photos vanished from the university server. The junior epigrapher who noted the emblem was reassigned to a language digitization project. Internal communications referenced a classification trigger labeled Heritage Category 3A, Sensitive Religious Cartographic Intersections. The plates never returned to Chennai. The diver who retrieved the codex, Sundar M., was summoned to a closed-door committee in Hyderabad. His testimony remained sealed. He never saw the plates again. His wedding was rescheduled twice before he finally missed the officiation, called away last minute for an inquiry detail. In public records, the find was recategorized as ceremonial metalwork. Press releases described the plates as ritual offerings depicting stylized local mythology. He never went back in the water. 6 years later, across the globe, another manuscript would echo the same coastline and the same burned-in symbol, the Sahara glass inscription. In the spring of 2004, a geological team from the University of Milan conducted a survey in the Libyan desert. Their focus, a dense concentration of natural desert glass formed by extreme heat, likely from an ancient meteor impact. Near the edge of a known crater, one geologist stumbled upon something anomalous, a flat, man-sized slab of fused silica, half buried under millennia of shifting sand. Unlike the surrounding shards, this one was whole, smooth, shaped. When the team cleared its surface, they found shallow, deliberate engravings, cuts that shouldn't have survived a melt event. Yet they were there, patterns that curved, spiraled, and clustered toward a central mark. The carving was younger than the crater, transported under strict conditions to a partner lab in Strasbourg. The slab underwent microscopic analysis. The results stunned the technicians. While the glass itself dated to a known meteoric event, the engraved striations showed evidence of abrasion thousands of years later, carved after the glass had cooled, not as it formed. Infrared imaging revealed a pattern beneath the surface, weathering, a spiral of glyphs radiating from a hub, surrounded by geometric tracings. When one physicist overlaid a reconstructed night sky using precessional software, the spiral's radial points aligned perfectly with stellar positions circa 10,800 BCE. The sky it showed never exists today. At the spiral's center was a faint, nearly missed engraving. 3 concentric circles, bisected vertically. A note in the lab's logbook flagged the mark and labeled it for cataloging. Emblem A17K. One assistant circled it in red pen. They'd seen nothing like it in North African symbology. 3 weeks before the team's findings were due to be published, a notice arrived from the sponsoring body, a heritage foundation partially backed by a European cultural ministry. The slab was to be classified under a sensitive cultural artifact clause and transferred to an undisclosed vault for preservation. The public paper went forward, but with revisions. The engravings were dismissed as modern tool markings. The authors speculated that the slab had been tampered with by recent visitors, perhaps looters or misinformed locals. Privately, contamination tests had ruled out modern handling. The engraving cuts were ancient. The glyphs remained unexplained. The note A17K was erased from the final draft. The postdoctoral researcher who challenged the revised narrative lost her contract renewal. Her thesis, originally titled Post-Formation Modifications in Libyan Desert Glass, was withdrawn. She never recovered her lab notebook, which contained the only handwritten reference to A17K. She left academia 6 months later. The symbol tagged as Emblem A17K will surface again, 14 years later, in a place that should never have known the desert existed. The Vatican undertext. In 1973, deep inside the Vatican Apostolic Library's restoration wing, an aging conservator named Father Luca Benedetti was preparing a 14th-century theological codex for rebinding. As part of a routine pre-restoration inspection, he used a new ultraviolet lamp, recently acquired from a Swiss optics firm, to examine the parchment for insect damage. But what emerged under the glow wasn't mold or decay. Faint lines, perpendicular to the visible Latin sermons, shimmered below the surface. Letters, older, angular, and utterly foreign, ran against the grain of the medieval text. The codex was a palimpsest. The parchment had been scraped, reused, but the ghost of its first inscription refused to vanish. Over several late nights, Benedetti captured the undertext using an experimental microfilm camera attached to a lens mount he'd modified himself. As he developed the reels, shapes began to clarify. Lines of non-Indo-European script, interspersed with what looked like numerical tables. Columned figures grouped in 6s and 12s. On the 5th reel, he found a crude diagram, a circular rendering of Earth, framed by wave patterns and flanked by a series of rising lines marked with cross-strokes, possibly denoting elevations. The coastlines were unfamiliar. No Europe, no Mediterranean. Instead, a massive polar landmass, drawn without ice. The erased map showed ice-free coasts. In one corner, inked in a different hand and in later Latin, a marginal note labeled The Layer, Scriptura de Secunda Aurora, writing of the second dawn. Father Benedetti submitted a formal request to study the undertext as a possible pre-Christian scientific manuscript. It never reached publication channels. Instead, it was flagged and redirected to a named commission he had never heard of. Archivum Custodum Rariorum. Within 2 weeks, the codex was removed from general restoration and marked as under evaluation. His lab access was restricted. Microfilm reels were collected for central duplication and archival storage. One reel, the 5th, was listed as lost in transit. The phrase Second Dawn vanished from all subsequent documentation. Father Benedetti was reassigned to the administrative division, managing parish correspondence. No more manuscript work. No more deep archive access. When his father died that same year in Florence, Benedetti was denied travel clearance. His internal file marked pending procedural review. He never returned to restoration. The last known mention of his work on the codex appeared in a misfiled equipment receipt from the optical department. The monk called it the Second Dawn. That same phrase, Second Dawn, will resurface decades later outside of Europe, written in a tongue that should never have known Latin. If the first three cases were coincidences, isolated anomalies, overinterpreted symbols, or simply the work of overzealous researchers, then the next story will strain that comfort. Because now, the details start to repeat. Not just the emblem, not just the date, but the data itself. Identical coastlines, matching floodlines, aligned star fields. We are no longer dealing with misfiled curiosities. From here on, the incidents begin to mirror one another with unnerving precision, separated by language, distance, and time, yet speaking the same hidden truth. And the fourth manuscript was never meant to survive the thaw. The Siberian bark scrolls. In the summer of 1991, as rising temperatures softened the Siberian permafrost, a road crew breaking ground near the Indigirka River in Yakutia struck a void. Machinery collapsed into a shallow cavity, an ancient burial chamber, half collapsed, sealed in frost. Inside, wrapped in animal hide and packed in snow-worn clay, workers uncovered a bundle of birch bark scrolls. The bark was dark, almost black with age, but intact. Thin ink lines still held on the surface. Local officials notified the regional museum in Yakutsk, and within 48 hours, the scrolls were in climate-controlled storage. Staff began preliminary documentation. Excitement grew. Then the translations began. Carbon dating returned surprising results. The bark had aged to the edge of the known historical inscription record for the region, older than expected by nearly 3,000 years. The ink composition was unlike anything in the local tradition. And the script? Unfamiliar. A regional linguist, Irina Drozdova, began decoding the patterns. One scroll described sky mirrors that scorched the ground, followed by a long winter born from the fire from above. Another panel, less poetic, more diagrammatic, sketched a fragmented globe, its coastal margins heavily notched. The bark recorded fire from the sky, overlaying the map against modern sea-level reconstructions from the Younger Dryas period, revealed an uncanny fit. Flood boundaries, drawn in primitive ink, matched the latest geophysical models from international climate studies. Near the end of one scroll, drawn with a shaking hand, was a symbol. Crude, irregular, but unmistakable. 3 concentric circles crossed by a single vertical line. The flood line matched modern models. Initial press interest flagged the scrolls as an archaeological puzzle. Then came silence. The museum's operating budget was abruptly slashed. A central directive ordered the scrolls moved to Moscow for advanced conservation procedures. Dr. Drozdova, who had begun presenting her preliminary readings to colleagues abroad, was informed the material now fell under a state historical security directive. Her requests for further access were denied. The bark disappeared into federal custody. Dr. Drozdova's upcoming presentation in Helsinki was canceled without explanation. Her visa application was declined. Funding for her other projects dried up. She never returned to the site. She watched from a hilltop as the dig zone was fenced, paved, and labeled an infrastructure corridor. No further archaeological access was granted. She missed her son's university graduation. Her travel request marked pending clearance. By the early 2000s, 4 archives on 3 continents were holding texts that described the same flood, the same star field, and the same forbidden emblem. Opération Mnemosyne microfilm, Washington, D.C., 1959. Inside a windowless records room beneath a federal complex on Nebraska Avenue, an archivist named Thomas Whitner was conducting an inventory of declassified World War II intelligence reels. The job was routine: verifying catalog numbers, inspecting film condition, updating entries for transfer to the National Archives. One unmarked microfilm roll stood out. No canister label, no reference sheet. Curious. Whitner loaded the reel into a viewing station. It clicked forward. Frame after frame revealed photographed manuscript pages, each from a different origin, none bearing military stamps. The title frame read, Operation Mnemosyne, Preliminary Comparative Study. The images weren't just random fragments. They were organized, side-by-side comparisons of anomalous texts. One showed the copper plates recovered from a coastal site. Another depicted glyphs carved into desert glass. A third featured the undertext from a medieval palimpsest, still bearing the words Second Dawn. Typed annotations ran alongside. Certain glyphs were circled across different scripts. Margins included notations in courier typeface, symbol recurrence code, A17K, date window match, 10,103 BCE plus 7Y. A separate frame displayed a tabulated page titled Helios Index, event window, 10th 803, 10,786 BCE. Candidate terminal civilization. They had already compared the fragments. The government gave the event a name. One frame even included a low-resolution map overlay, with flood boundaries plotted across 5 continents, consistent with modern meltwater pulses. A narrator voice may interject here. One could argue the reel was a Cold War-era fabrication, an internal myth meant to mislead enemy analysts through false signals. But that leaves one question. Why classify a lie? 3 days after logging the reel into his ledger, Whitner was visited by 2 officials who declined to show identification. They confiscated the microfilm, citing misclassification under intelligence residual protocols. The inventory card was replaced. The item was relabeled as Agricultural Supply Footage, Denmark, 1947. Whitner was told to sign a non-disclosure acknowledgement under penalty of reassignment. The viewing station was moved to another floor. No trace of the reel remained. Before locking the film room that night, Whitner quietly wrote 6 words on the back of a photo of his daughter. Mnemosyne, Helios Index, 10,803 BCE. That weekend, he was ordered to a temporary detail assignment in Kansas. He missed her graduation. He never asked about the reel again. Hoax or not, the reel proves one thing. By 1959, someone inside a major government already believed in an erased civilization they called the terminal culture. The Atacama Star Ledger. In 2011, a Chilean anthropologist named Dr. Camila Reyes was cataloging neglected artifacts in a small colonial-era church storeroom near San Pedro de Atacama. Most items were mundane. Cracked statuary, handwritten sermons, fragmented relics. But in a sealed wooden box mislabeled Inventario 1852, she found a bundle of quipus, ancient Incan knot cords, tightly bound in waxed linen, buried beneath layers of crumbling paper and a faint, musky odor. An attached note, yellowed and water-stained, read only, Ropas de estrellas paganas, heathen star ropes. They had never been formally logged. No previous studies, no record of church approval. Dr. Reyes brought in 2 quipu experts from Santiago. They were puzzled. The knot patterns didn't conform to any known record-keeping or census traditions. There were no base 10 accounting sequences, no known ceremonial codes. But one intern, trained in computational archaeology, ran the knot intervals through a custom parser designed to interpret base 12 numeric arrays. The output, a repeating set of coordinates. When plotted, the numbers aligned to stellar positions, right ascension, declination, axial precession angles. The knots mapped the sky, Overlaying the data showed alignment with sky models reconstructed from the Sahara glass slab and the Vatican undertext, a configuration of the southern celestial dome circa 10 to 800 BCE. The same epoch, the same rotation. And woven at the very end of the final chord was a tiny emblem, faint but precise. 3 nested circles stitched with dark llama hair, bisected by a single vertical strand of dyed wool. The date appeared again in numbers. Encouraged by the data, the team drafted a joint paper on pre-Inca astral encoding. But before submission, the sponsoring university pulled funding. Official reasoning: methodological inconsistencies and insufficient cultural consultation. Then, the church intervened. Citing religious ownership of all contents within its storerooms, it reclaimed the quipus and locked them in an ecclesiastical archive. When Reyes logged in to retrieve her notes, she found the digital folder gone. A server maintenance report cited a security incident involving unauthorized backups. No photos remained, no scans. The computer scientist, still early in her career, was mocked online when fragments of the project leaked through academic gossip chains. Star chords, they called them. She faced ridicule from both astronomers and anthropologists. She withdrew from her PhD program months later. Her personal hard drive, which contained the first decoded star map, was lost during a move. She never touched another research dataset. By this point, 6 manuscripts, across 6 decades and 3 continents, independently encode the same cataclysmic window. From here, the pattern stops asking for permission. Until now, a skeptic might still hold the line. Coincidence, misinterpretation, academic overreach. 10,000 years is a long time to misread. Symbols can repeat, maps can echo, data can deceive. But that defense is about to collapse. Because what follows doesn't come from forgotten storerooms or disputed digs. It comes from climate labs, from polar boreholes, from machines designed to model the future, accidentally reading the past. These were not built to find history, but they did. And what they uncovered was not noise, it was a voice, calling from the ice. The Antarctic core cylinder. In January 2007, a multinational climate research consortium began deep core drilling along a subglacial ridge near Dome C, Antarctica. The project's aim was to recover uninterrupted ice layers stretching back at least 800,000 years, allowing a more precise reconstruction of Earth's climate transitions. At a depth of just over 200-300 meters, the drill head stalled. Pressure readings spiked. When the core section was extracted, the team discovered a deformed segment of ice containing a foreign object. A metallic cylinder, slightly corroded, about the length of a human hand. It had no organic casing, no sediment trail, no logical pathway into that layer. The ice encasing it dated to over 20,000 years ago, thousands of years before human presence on the continent. The metal was older than the ice around it. The cylinder was moved to a secure field lab for analysis. Inside, scientists uncoiled a tightly rolled strip of thin, flexible metal, no thicker than foil. Under magnification, it revealed micro-etchings, rows of repeating glyphs and numeric-like sequences, etched with sub-millimeter precision. One climate modeler, Dr. Hanna Gurevich, recognized a particular number sequence. It matched an abrupt rise in global sea level, the same sequence she had previously seen in datasets modeling the Younger Dryas meltwater pulse. She ran the strip's numerical data against modern reconstructions. The curves aligned exactly. The terminal values clustered around a narrow window, 10,803 to 10,786 BCE. The sea level curve matched the Helios index. In one corner of the strip, just beneath a grid of glyphs, was a tiny symbol. 3 concentric circles intersected by a vertical line. The same emblem previously seen on the Operation Minimazine microfilm. Characters surrounding the symbol bore partial resemblance to the Sahara glass spiral notation. There was no cultural lineage to explain the continuity. The connections were mathematical. 3 days later, the cylinder was removed from the field lab and reclassified under a military designation. Unexploded ordnance, deep core intrusion. Expedition documents were revised. The damaged section was described in official reports as the result of instrumental disturbance and data loss. In an internal memo marked confidential, a project supervisor noted, anomaly consistent with Nemazini comparative samples. Recommend containment and withdrawal. No further mention of the cylinder appears in the published research. Dr. Gurevich was instructed to delete her analysis files pending methodological audit. Within 6 weeks, her renewal grant, focused on modeling abrupt climate events, was rejected without appeal. She quietly left the project. Her final paper was never submitted. She never returned to polar research. The Helios Index is no longer just a classified table. It has now been physically drilled from the oldest ice on Earth, the Geneva Quantum Manuscript. In early 2018, at a physics laboratory just outside Geneva, a junior data analyst named Julien Corval was reprocessing legacy datasets from a 2002 high-energy particle collision experiment. The project, long archived, had produced massive volumes of what was dismissed at the time as background noise. Quantum field turbulence, detector error, machine drift. Corval was designing a compression algorithm to separate signal from entropy. It was meant to discard meaningless noise. But one dataset refused to behave. Instead of chaos, the algorithm began returning structured output, a stable, repeating matrix. It made no sense. The collisions were random, the sensors imperfect. There should have been no pattern at all. The collider printed an ancient symbol. Corval visualized the pattern as a 2-dimensional block grid. It was complex. Intersecting nodes, recurring intervals, nested symmetries. One visiting linguist, there on a sabbatical studying semiotic systems and AI compression, paused when she saw the output. She had seen something like it before, in a leaked image set from a Cold War-era comparative microfilm. She pulled up photographs labeled Operation Minimazine. The glyph layout in Corval's visualization mirrored the structure of those manuscripts exactly. The drowned copper plates, the Sahara glass spiral, the Vatican undertext. Same glyph spacing, same column grouping. And at the grid's lower center, embedded in the output data, was a reconstructed symbol. 3 concentric circles, bisected by a vertical bar. The same emblem labeled A17K in the Sahara lab. Noise became writing no one taught the machine. Excited, the team drafted an internal discussion paper. They titled it, The Quantum Manuscript. What began as a joke soon shifted tone. Tables emerged, comparisons solidified, and even skeptical reviewers admitted the structural match was too precise to ignore. Then the paper hit administration. Within a week, all visualization files were locked behind access restrictions. The analysis was deemed speculative and reputationally risky. An internal ethics committee warned against cross-domain pattern chasing, citing concerns over pseudoscience and reputational integrity. The name Minimazine was never mentioned aloud. But someone in IT deleted all leaked microfilm overlays from the shared folder. Julien Corval, the analyst who first spotted the anomaly, was quietly reassigned to software compliance testing. His request to continue development on the compression algorithm was denied. He missed his sister's wedding, scheduled instead for a mandatory ethics training weekend. He never saw the pattern again. The lab listed the anomaly under recursive compression artifact. For the first time, the emblem tagged A17K in the Sahara lab has returned, not carved in stone or cast in metal, but rising from pure experimental data. The second dawn fragment. In 2020, an independent historical philologist named Elias Hurst was granted temporary access to a private manuscript collection in southern France. The archive, assembled from distressed monastic libraries across Europe, had been closed to academic researchers for decades. Among the boxes of unbound parchment, Elias discovered a loose, partial folio. The visible text appeared to be a standard medieval homily in late Latin, but the parchment was unevenly scraped. Under angled light, he saw the ghost of earlier ink, lines running in an unfamiliar direction, faint and granular. The folio was a palimpsest, but the undertext looked familiar. Using a consumer-grade multispectral imaging rig and open-source recovery software, Elias enhanced the erased layer. The script emerged, irregular but consistent. It matched the pre-Latin characters recorded by Father Benedetti in the 1973 Vatican Codex. But this fragment went further. It named a place, Urba ante glaciem, the city before the ice. It described an event, expectatio heliaca in anno 10,803 stellarum oblitarum, the Helios reckoning in the year 10,803 of forgotten stars. It named a people, populi secundae aurori, the people of the second dawn. In the margin, a hand, finer and more recent, had drawn a careful emblem, 3 concentric circles crossed by a vertical bar. Beside it, in late Latin, a note, Sigillum memoriae contra diluvium, seal of memory against the flood. The date 10,803 BCE appears in words. The seal of memory is our recurring symbol. Elias cross-checked the number with the leaked Helios index table. It matched precisely. And suddenly, a line from the earlier Vatican manuscript returned with clarity. The Vatican monk's second dawn was quoting this. The collection's owner, upon learning of Elias's interest in the undertext, abruptly revoked access, citing insurance and liability concerns. The leaf was pulled from examination. Months later, it appeared in an anonymous auction catalog labeled simply, Damaged Medieval Theological Fragment. No mention of a palimpsest. No mention of pre-Christian writing. When Elias attempted to publish a short paper, his submission was rejected for lack of primary image rights. The high-resolution scans he had uploaded to cloud storage were quietly removed by legal notice. The owner's lawyers blocked further inquiry. Elias returned home empty-handed. His research funds drained by travel, translation, and legal consultations. He sold his imaging camera, the same one that had uncovered the erased text, to pay rent. He never again stepped foot in a rare manuscript archive. By now, across 10 countries in 7 decades, the same dates, emblem, and erased name, Second Dawn, have surfaced too many times to dismiss as chance. The anonymous tiling document. In April 2023, a 74-page PDF quietly appeared on a little-known academic file-sharing server used by linguistics and archaeology graduate students. The file was simply named Tilings den de Hobabidot Zerdut Jat Final PDF. The uploader was anonymous. The account had no profile, no history. Within 48 hours, it vanished. But by then, a few downloads had already occurred. The document was not theory. It was data. It compiled photographs, scans, and full transcriptions of 10 anomalous artifacts, plus 5 others never seen publicly. Each was arranged into a single comparative matrix. Each was linked, line by line, to a recurring symbol. The file did not speculate. It calculated. Glyph columns were cross-referenced across time and geography. The Sahara spiral, the birch bark scrolls, the quipu fiber knots. all decrypted into base systems. Flood boundaries from bark scrolls matched satellite-derived sea level models. Star maps from metal strips, quipu chords, and palimpsests converged on the same celestial alignment. 10,800 BCE plus 7 years. A table labeled Structural Glyph Convergence Matrix. Helios class showed common syntax rules across 6 scripts. Operation Mnemosyne was cited by name. So was the Helios index. At the center of the PDF was a section titled The Erased Literal Hypothesis. The document read like an internal audit. One final diagram tied it all together. The emblem, 3 concentric circles divided by a vertical bar, was called a tiling key. It was not just a symbol, the document claimed. It was a cipher, an instruction for assembling fragments into a single lost narrative. A collapsed civilization, coastal and global, obliterated in a single cataclysm. It names the culture, the erased literal. Within 3 days, the document disappeared. The original host page was replaced with a generic 403 error, access forbidden, resource removed. Mirror links died in sequence. Cloud drives revoked access. Even archived previews expired in unison, as if someone had traced each node in the download chain. Only one confirmed copy survived. A graduate student in London had printed the file the night it dropped. When she returned to the server to recheck citations, her account had been disabled. The violation? Exceeding data retrieval permissions. The student, midway through a dissertation on cultural memory and civilizational trauma, abandoned her project 2 weeks later. She never determined whether the takedown was automated or deliberate. She never found the source. She never spoke publicly about the document again. Her printout remains in a locked box, unscanned, unshared. Whether that file was an internal leak, an elaborate forgery, or the final manifesto of a lost civilization, it leaves one question open. Who decides which past we are allowed to remember? This isn't just about 10 manuscripts. It isn't just about a vanished civilization or a flood 12,000 years ago. It's about memory, about who controls it, and what happens when it's taken away. Every erased line, every sealed vault, every vanished reel isn't just a loss to history. It's a decision, a choice made again and again about what the future is allowed to remember. We've seen it before, in family names lost to silence, in censored events buried beneath redacted files, in languages that no one speaks anymore. And now, perhaps, in manuscripts that should not exist, all pointing to a chapter we were never meant to read. If a timeline can be rewritten by a handful of classified memos and missing fragments, then what is history? A record of what happened, or of what we're allowed to know. Of course, there's another explanation. These could all be mistakes. Misread inscriptions, overinterpreted dates, a patchwork of patterns drawn too tightly. Maybe even a digital hoax built to deceive. But then the records speak. 10 separate sources, 10 different materials: bark, copper, glass, fiber, metal, ice, ink, and machine code. All converging on the same star map, the same flood line, the same emblem. 3 circles, 1 cut. So you decide. Are these coincidences and shadows? Just the noise of broken data and old myths? Or are they fragments of a memory we weren't supposed to keep? A warning from the last coastal civilization before the ice returned? Archive it or forget it.